Hey guys, welcome back. I know I say this every single month. I might as well add it into the tagline of my wrap-up videos, but I cannot believe that it's already June. Even though somehow May felt extremely long and yet extremely short at the same time. Anyway, that said, I am coming to you with a wrap-up of all the books that I read in May. Now, I ended up reading a total of 9 books, which hooray! And it was a healthy mix of cozy mysteries, romance, of course. There was an adventure book in there, thriller. We'll get into it all. So I'm still actually trying to decide how I want to do my wrap-ups. I typically do them in the style that I'm about to do them, but I know in the past I've kind of dabbled with different formats. So before I dive into the video, I wanted to get your opinion really quickly on what you like to see in wrap-ups. If you prefer the books in any kind of order, if you prefer them in any kind of delivery in terms of like a snippet versus just my thoughts or a full blown out exposition spoiler filled review. I'd love to know what you think and your suggestions below. So if you have any, please share with me. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and do it kind of the style that I'm used to. I will be talking about the books in the order that I read them just because it's easier for me to sort them on Goodreads that way. So without further ado, let's dive into the books. Okay, so first book that I read in May was Arsenic and Adobo. This was a cozy mystery that I ended up rating 4 stars, and it was so highly anticipated, not only just on my list, but it seemed in the book community, the cozy book community in general, everyone was chomping at the bit to get their hands on this book, and I was so excited to hear about that. First of all, it was, I believe, book of the month's first cozy mystery what do you call it, pick offering that they had. I don't have a book of the month subscription, so I don't know what they call it, but yeah, they had it as part of their book of the month subscription, so I thought that was a fantastic idea. It got a lot of people who've never read cozy mysteries to pick one up, and I personally had my eye on this book for months because A, it's a cozy mystery, but more specifically because it centered around a Filipina main character. Now, my husband is actually Filipino, and I have really close ties to that culture and his family, and so I was really excited to read a book starring a Filipina American because, first of all, the diversity. I love reading about different cultures, but then also more specifically, or more importantly, all of the food references. Now, I love me some foodie cozy mysteries, but to have one that focuses on Filipino food, to me, took it to a whole nother level because let's be honest, it's the type of food that you don't read a lot about. And reading the book, which first of all, obviously I gave it 4 stars, so yes, it was a really good book, but reading the book, it was so chock full of food references and cultural references. I really think that that's what made it stand out for me. Now, in terms of the plot as a whole, I will say it wasn't necessarily anything groundbreaking, and I don't mean that in a bad way. But let's be honest, most cozy mystery tropes kind of follow the same formula, especially the first book, which tends to be that our main character who ends up becoming the amateur sleuth, the first book is usually when they are the suspect, and that's why they're working so hard to investigate because they want to clear their own name. That's exactly what happened in this case. We have our main heroine whose aunts own a Filipino restaurant, and so somebody there ends up dying, being poisoned, and of course they are blaming the food at the restaurant, and it's up to our amateur sleuth to kind of investigate because she wants to clear her name, she wants to clear her aunt's names, so everybody can live happily ever after. The next book that I ended up reading was called Before Summer Ends. This was a Harlequin special edition by Mallery. I don't read a lot of Harlequins, at least as much as I want to. I do enjoy them a lot, but I don't read as many as I should, and reading this one reminded me that I need to pick them up a lot more often because it was fantastic. I ended up giving this one 4 stars as well, and I was actually influenced by my friend Bree over at the Categorically Romance podcast. They had a whole episode where they were talking about the books that they were reading, and this was one of them. It sounded so interesting and heartwarming, and so I had to pick it up. So this one is about a school teacher named Nissa who sublets her apartment for this summer so that she can essentially house sit somewhere else, make a little money, and then return back to her house after the summer ends. Well, the house sitting gig ends up falling through, and yet the people who are subletting her apartment are still going to be there, so that ends up leaving her with nowhere to stay. So enter Desmond, her brother's childhood friend. They grew up together, and Nissa ended up knowing him very well because this guy was basically part of the family. And so she ends up calling him because her brother says, you know, hey, he's got this big house. I'm sure he's got room to take you in. You might as well. And it sounds like a good idea, but at the same time, she's been harboring a crush on him since they were younger. And so she doesn't know if it would be a good idea for them to basically live under the same roof for the summer. But she's desperate and she ends up moving in. And so what you see basically is their relationship unfolding, going from childhood friends slash brother's friend and younger sister transitioning into romance. Now, because this is a Harlequin special edition, it is a kind of slower burn relationship development. So I mean that to say, even though they have a lot of chemistry between them and banter, they don't necessarily hook up right away. But totally okay, because again, the writing is spectacular. I mean, it's a Susan Mallery, so of course you know you're in for quality writing, and that was one of the things that I enjoyed most about the story and why I gave it 4 stars. So the next book I read was a romance, but it was a shifter romance, and it's called The Teacher's Pet Wolf. I believe, let me look at my notes. Okay, so it was actually the 3rd book in a series, but to be honest, I didn't know that going in, and so if this book sounds interesting to you, you could easily pick it up without having read the previous 2 books. So like I mentioned, it's a shifter, and basically it is about a woman who coincidentally is also a teacher, but she has been essentially FaceTiming with this guy who lives in Alaska on this nature preserve. I think he's like a forest ranger or something, and she has been FaceTiming with him weekly so that he can show her class all of these kind of like outdoorsy things and specialties that are up there in Alaska and all of that kind of stuff. So when the school year ends, you know, she thinks that she basically is never going to talk to the guy again because class is over, but he tells her that he's coming into town and that he wants to meet her. And so up until this point, they had been just a little bit flirty, of course, keeping it professional, but she had kind of a little feeling of chemistry that if they were to finally meet each other, things could actually spark. And that's exactly what happens. However, she's harboring a secret, which is that, I mean, this is not a spoiler, but which is that she is a shifter. And so she really doesn't necessarily want to fall for him. She just wants it to be kind of like a quick meet you, one night stand kind of thing. But as soon as they meet, that's not the case. He knows that he wants to lock it down. And so I gotta say, this was, I mean, it was a novella. It wasn't necessarily super short, but it was definitely novella length. And I think that the author packed in a lot of character development in that short amount of pages. Not only do you get to understand kind of her rationale, but you get to see where he's coming from and why he is so interested in her and is pursuing her. And then also there are side characters, which of course will be the stars of the next book. But you get to see enough of the side characters to where it is set up to you want to understand and read more about them. And so by the time I finished this book, I was satisfied with where our main couple was at, and then I also found myself wanting to carry on the series because at that point they had built up the secondary characters, and I'm like, okay, I know what they're about, I know their motivation, now let's see their journey to getting together. Next up, we have another romance called Book Boyfriend, which I have described in my Goodreads summary as kind of like a You've Got Mail type of scenario. Unfortunately, I did give this one 3 stars. The only reason that that's unfortunate is because it was a little middle of the road for me, not very memorable, but at the same time when I was reading it, it was enjoyable. So basically what you've got is a woman who meets this guy meets girl. Basically the couple meets and they kind of hit it off, but the only thing is that the guy is a very well-known romance author. And by well known, I mean that his books are well known, but obviously the audience and his readers don't know that he is a man. And so that is something that he is trying to keep under wraps. However, when he meets this woman in person, he realizes that basically she is his pseudonym's #1 fan. So this woman loves to read and, you know, talks about books all the time and how she's such a fan of this particular romance author, which is the guy, and he can't really talk about it. And so they end up, you know, having a relationship, but at the same time, he's kind of weighed down with this secret about being this romance author. And so the story is really just kind of their relationship and how they essentially meet in real life, and then how he decides, if at all, to tell her or reveal that he's this romance author. So the reason that I mentioned that it's similar to You've Got Mail is because if you've seen the movie, you know that when Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks meet, Tom Hanks knows that Meg Ryan is kind of the person on the other side of the screen, but Meg Ryan doesn't know that, and this situation was exactly the same. So the guy knows that this woman is the fan that he had been talking to, but she clearly doesn't know that he's the author of all of her favorite books. So yeah, I mean, the You've Got Mail aspect of it definitely hooked me in, but like I said, overall it just wasn't very memorable, which was a little bit disappointing. But if you're looking for kind of like a quick weekend romance, definitely check it out because it is available on Kindle Unlimited. Okay, so this next book is called Deep Fathom by James Rollins, and this is actually my second James Rollins book, and it is an adventure. It's an adventure book, and I rated this 5 stars. It was fantastic. First of all, I listened to it on audiobook, though in this case I don't know if that would make a difference. I think that it would be just as enjoyable if you read it, but I mean, it was like a summer blockbuster movie, but in book form. It was so action-packed. You could visualize everything that was happening on the page. And I mean, I actually wish that I could go back and reread it because it was that good. And as I was reading it, or listening to it rather, because my husband and I share an Audible account, after I finished, I'm like, babe, you've got to read this. It's so good. So he's in the middle of it right now, and hopefully he thinks it's as good as I do. But basically what it is, it starts off as what can only be described as kind of like a disaster movie where there is this huge eclipse that kind of triggers this solar flare or outage, or basically it triggers a whole bunch of things in the world. So you've got power outages, obviously internet outages, you've got huge tidal waves that take out entire islands, and so just within a span of minutes you've got all of these people who are dead and just all of this devastating loss. So meanwhile, while that's happening, there is a set of kind of like underwater adventurers. I don't know if that's their technical name, but that's what I'm thinking of it. They are basically on a voyage to kind of discover this try and find this wreckage that's supposed to be having all of this gold or all of this treasure, whatever, so that they can hit payday. And they get interrupted on their mission because they're brought in by the government to basically investigate, or at least try to find what's the name of the plane? Air Force One, because during all of this kind of solar flare national disaster, the president's plane went down and they can't find it. It ends up landing into the middle of the ocean, blah, blah, blah. There's so many layers to this story. I am not doing it justice at all by describing it, but when I tell you it was fantastic, you have to believe me. Now, obviously, if you have been around my channel for a while, you'll know that typically the kind of books that I read most often are cozy mysteries or romance, thrillers every now and then, more so in the winter time. I say all that to say I don't read a lot of adventure books, and this was one that totally totally changed my mind. Like I said, I've read one of his books before, and it was good, but this one I think was just the perfect storm of the right book at the right time. And so if you're watching this actually in the month of June when I put it out, I definitely recommend adding this one to your list because, like I said, it reads exactly like a summer blockbuster. It's fast-paced, it's thrilling, everything that you want in a blockbuster, very like Independence Day. So if you're kind of looking for something different than what you usually read, I highly recommend you pick this one up. So this next book, I just mentioned how most of the thrillers that I read happen in the winter time, but something happened, probably influenced by Bookstagram, if I'm being honest, where I decided that I really wanted to kind of switch things up and pick up a thriller. And that's how I landed on The Butcher. It's clearly leaving me speechless. I give it 4 stars, and I've seen this term coined, I believe Addie over at Crime by the Book says this, but it's definitely a popcorn thriller, meaning that it's a thriller that's not necessarily super gruesome and dark, but at the same time it's still clearly a thriller, and it's very fast-paced where you just kind of want to gobble it up in a couple of sittings. The Butcher was definitely that. Let me check the author, Jennifer Hillier. I have actually heard of her books before, but this is my first book by her that I read, and I can definitely see what all the hype is about because this book had me at the edge of my seat. So basically what we have is this young chef who's really making a name for himself. He moves into his grandfather's house, who his grandfather left in the house because the grandfather can no longer take care of it. He's going to move into a retirement home. So the guy is thrilled. This is his childhood home. He's happy to have all this space and all of that kind of stuff. And so while he is basically kind of excavating the backyard because he plans to do just a little bit of demo work, he unearths this box. And what's in the box, basically, it rocks his world. And it makes him question everything about just his family in general, because at the same time, his girlfriend is an author of true crime books. And so she's currently investigating kind of the history behind this serial killer called the Butcher, which happened a couple of decades before. And the reason that she's so interested in this case is because she believes that the Butcher actually killed her mom, even though he was allegedly caught at the time. So between her boyfriend, our main character, finding this box in his backyard, and then her kind of investigating the Butcher and whether or not the guy who was arrested for it was actually him or not, those two stories intertwine in a way to where you will be reading this book again with your mouth hanging open, like, what the hell is happening? So fast-paced. Now, even though it's a popcorn thriller, don't get me wrong, it is gruesome. It doesn't necessarily shy away from the details because we do get a look at the serial killer's MO and all of the kind of gruesome things that he did to people. But oh my god, I read this book, I think, in like 2 days, 3 max, and I mean, it was fantastic. So it wouldn't be a wrap-up if I didn't include at least one Meg Langslow book, aka my favorite cozy mystery series. I ended up reading Terns of Endearment, which is the 25th book in the series, and I gave this one 5 stars, which that's a big deal. Don't get me wrong, like I said, I love this series, but I don't actually rate cozy mysteries 5 stars a lot, only because they tend to be formulaic, which again, that's fine. It's very comforting to me, but not without their shortcomings. And so a lot of the times, the ones that I really enjoy, I'll give 4 stars. Some of them I'll give 3 stars, meaning that I enjoyed them, but I won't necessarily remember them. This one, totally 5 stars. It was the perfect storm of all of the things that I love about cozy mysteries put together into one book. Let's talk about what those things are really quickly. One, it was part of the Meg Langslow series, aka my favorite cozy mystery series. I love following along with Meg and her family and all their hijinks, and the fact that this was part of the series you automatically get like a minimum of 3 stars. I know that's not really fair in rating, but rating's not fair. So the second thing that kind of rounds it out was the fact that it takes place on a cruise ship. I love, love, love cruise ship settings on cozy mysteries. It's something just so fun about it. And actually, now that I think about it, it's not even just cozy mysteries. I just love the cruise ship setting. It's another kind of like locked room mystery style, and so having a story take place on a cruise ship I think is always fun and always lends itself to a certain type of investigation. So in this case, it's Meg, obviously, and her family are on this cruise because her grandfather was invited to speak about, you know, all of this kind of like animal preservation. As you guys remember, if you're familiar at all, he's kind of like this really famous Steve Irwin TV personality, and so that's why he was asked to come onto the ship and give all these talks. So the third thing is that part of the secondary cast of characters featured romance authors. Now, I love me some books that deal with bookish content, whether it's librarians or bookstore owners or authors. And in this case, the fact that they're not only authors but romance authors, I feel like is an inception within itself, because I love kind of seeing how authors portray other authors, especially in the romance genre, because that's one of my favorite genres. So we've got all of those things into this trifecta that really helped push it to that 5-star limit. But then beyond that, you've got the actual plot line. I think that this was one of those cozy mystery plots that was not at all formulaic. I did not see a lot of the stuff coming. Like I said, Meg and a lot of her family members end up leaving their small town to go onto this cruise, and as soon as they get on the cruise, shit starts hitting the fan, basically. There ends up being like a secondary twist, which at that point I just threw my hands up. I'm like, okay, we're good. I am in this story. I did not see any of this coming. And again, that's so rare for cozy mysteries because they're formulaic. And to be surprised, especially after having read so many, it's always a treat. So if you're looking for any of those elements that I mentioned, or even just a cozy mystery that kind of throws you off and you may not guess who the killer is right away, this one is definitely it for you. And I will say, I don't think you have to read any of the other books in the Meg Langslow series, so surely you don't need to have 24 books of backlog to enjoy this one. You can just dive right in and be taken on the ride. So the next book that I read was called Focused, and it was a sports romance, but you'll be surprised to know it was not a hockey romance. I know, gasp, gasp, because that's my favorite sports in sports romances, but this one is actually a football romance, and I don't know how I discovered it. I think it was recommended for me on my Kindle lineup. Side note, this one is available on Kindle Unlimited, so if you have a subscription and this sounds good, you can go ahead and borrow it. So this book, I would say, was like a romance with a Hard Knocks storyline. And I don't know if you guys know what Hard Knocks is, but basically it's this this show that used to come on HBO. Was it HBO? Yes, the show that used to come on HBO where they would profile different football teams during their kind of preseason training and everything, and they would spotlight a different team every season. Ironically, I don't watch football, but I love that show. That's just a side note. So the reason that I say that this book reminded me a lot of that is because what we have is a woman who basically needs to impress her boss, because her boss gives her this task to be the liaison between the new player on the team and this production network. You're supposed to believe it's kind of like Amazon Prime doing their own version of the Hard Knocks show, but this woman is supposed to be the liaison between the football player that they'll be spotlighting and then the actual production crew. And so the football player that's new is this guy who she basically grew up with when they were younger. She goes into work, she ends up stumbling into him and, you know, tells him, hey, I'm going to be working with you, blah, blah, blah. And she mentions how, you know, hey, let's get it on the table. What I did as a teenager was silly, but we're adults now. We don't have to dwell on that. But this guy ends up being a total dick towards her, being very rude and gruff and kind of dismissive. And she's like, okay, well, I guess not. And so that first meeting between them does not go well at all, but she is determined to show her worth and prove to her boss that she can do this job. She tries to like bring out his personality, asking him questions and blah blah blah, so that the production team has content to work with. And so all of that ends up having him open up, but he's opening up to her, and so she's getting to know him a lot better, kind of understand what has happened with him since they were last teenagers. But I mean, naturally, all of that kind of close shared space, it's gonna make them develop feelings for each other, which is exactly what happens. Okay, we're at the last book, the 9th book that I read this month, or rather last month in May, and that was Live and Let Chai, which is the first book in the Seaside Cafe Cozy Mystery series. I also rated this one 5 stars. I mean, man, it was a good reading month for cozy mysteries, I must say. But I think part of the reason, I'll just go ahead and admit that I gave it 5 stars, was that it came at the perfect time. And by that I mean something extremely summery and refreshing, and just the exact kind of book that you want to read as we are entering summer. So that said, this one is about a woman who returns to her coastal town in North Carolina to open up a cafe that specializes in a variety of iced teas. Already I'm like, ooh, sign me up. That sounds so cool and refreshing, because I started reading this on a day where it's like 80 degrees. But as it would have it, one of the patrons at her cafe ends up dying a little bit later. He's discovered not at her restaurant, but kind of off the ground somewhere, but he's holding one of her iced tea jars. And so we've got the newest detective in town, they're always new, right, who sees this and automatically thinks that it was something in her tea that poisoned him. And so unfortunately, when he says this, it's in public and it's a small town, but there are other people around who hear that, and I mean, the gossip mills run crazy, and so everybody stops going to her shop. They think that she poisoned the guy, and so that's why she's compelled to investigate, which I thought that that was a really smart way of introducing kind of the amateur sleuth part of our character. One of the things that I really liked is that she knew her limits. I know a lot of times in cozy mysteries, at least for me, I will find it a little implausible, either the amount of information that the character knows, or the fact that they just do some dumb shit where I'm just like, a cop should be handling that. I think that this was a healthy balance of our character being realistically frustrating. Like, I could see her wanting to do certain things and follow certain leads because she really wants to clear her name, and the cop being frustrated at her. But then again, at the same time, there would also be instances where she would pull back and call the detective and tell him information that she found out or wants him to know. So yeah, that was really fun. So one of the things that I love the most about it was really the tea aspect. Again, it's summertime. I'm reading this in the summer on my patio where it's warm, and I gotta tell you guys, like, I didn't get 2 chapters in before I'm like, you know what? I need to go to the store and buy some tea. And I literally went to the store and bought some iced tea. I actually bought that Starbucks passion iced tea concentrate so that I could mix my own tea and drink it while I was reading this story. Yes, I'm one of those weirdos that does that. Very easily influenced. But yeah, I loved reading all of the different kind of tea combinations and how her shop was decorated. Again, it was on the coast, and her house is supposed to be this really beautiful place that has her cafe at the bottom and her living quarters at the top, and it just gave me all the summertime vibes that I wanted, and that's really, really why I loved it so much. But again, beyond that, I thought that it was a really solid foundation to the start of the series. I have a feeling I'll probably binge the series now because, again, it's giving me all those summertime vibes, unless I guess one of the stories takes place during the winter or Christmas. I don't know, I haven't gotten that far, but I know that at least book 2 is still summertime, so stay tuned for my wrap up about that one next month. Okay, so there you have it, a very chatty wrap up of all of the books that I read in May. I don't know how to make these less chatty. Maybe you prefer them chatty. I don't know. Again, let me know in the comments what you guys think about wrap-ups and the style that they should be. As you all know, I love talking about books, and it's the one part of my life where I could rattle on endlessly. So, in an effort not to make this video 45 minutes long, I've got my work cut out for me on the editing room floor. So let's hope that I can at least splice it down just a little bit. But if you have made it this far in the video, first of all, thank you. You are a saint, and you're also my people, because you clearly love hearing about me blabber about books, which is fantastic. Anyway, yes, if you've made it this far, please like and subscribe if you're not already subscribed, if you enjoy this video and you want to see more content like it. And in the meantime, happy reading, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye!